I'd love to introduce our first keynote, who's truly inspirational and extraordinary in the work that and the impact that he's made. CD and I go as far back as 2009, where I had the pleasure of working with him and meeting him when both of us were at the U.S. Peace Corps under the Obama administration, President Obama, as well as the director, Aaron Williams, who's a great mentor to both of us. CD also introduced me to my first board opportunity in Washington, D.C. with Pyxera Global, and I'll be forever indebted to him because it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of the role of Pyxera and his role and how that's informed kind of the type of work and the funding models that he has developed. C.D. Glin is President and CEO of the U.S. African Development Foundation, a U.S. government agency dedicated to supporting African-led and African-driven development solutions. The USADF, or the foundation, approach prioritizes African investments in customized local technical assistance to African grassroots communities and enterprises. Prior to joining USADF, Glin was the Associate Director for Africa for the Rockefeller Foundation from 2008 to 2010. Glin previously served as the presidential appointee in the Obama administration as the first Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and Global Partnerships at the U.S. Peace Corps. And he also played a fundamental role in the Peace Corps' 50th anniversary. Glin worked for the State Department, USAID, and the World Bank while based in Ghana and Nigeria. Glin also served as a volunteer in the first Peace Corps South Africa group during the presidency of Nelson Mandela. He holds a bachelor's in political science from Howard University, a master's in business management from Tulane University, and a postgraduate diploma in strategy and innovation from Oxford Saïd's Business School. Glin is term member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and in 2011 was designated by the White House as a champion for change for his commitment and contributions to international service and civic participation. So he'll come up and provide some contextual comments, and then we'll sit down together while I ask him to drop some knowledge on us in a more formal conversation. With that, without further ado, please join me, my friend, C.D. Glin.
Thank you, Shari. My sister, Duke family, you guys are really lucky to have her. She's an outstanding leader, an outstanding, phenomenal woman in the spirit of Maya Angelou. So really, really grateful for her to help extending this invitation. Grateful to the Business in Africa Club, MOFE, and SNE. Thanks for your leadership. I really appreciated the opportunity, the invitation, and thank all of you for being here. I was a little bit worried last night when I was coming in from DC because there's basketball games going on, and there were two North Carolina teams playing, and the games were both pretty close. And I said, gosh, if both of these, if UNC and Duke loses, it's going to be a very depressed crowd in the morning. So at least you guys pulled it out literally in the last second. And I felt better about this morning and said, okay, they'll be in good spirits. If I'm boring, at least they had a great night. So with that, I just want to start a little bit of the conversation around one of the key words that has been said around Africa and disruption and emerging markets. I mean, this is a very interesting word. We have Ifoso Ojomo is going to be here. I mean, he's one of the transformational leaders, a really good friend of mine, with Clay Christensen, who's the father of disruptive innovation. Those of you in the business school program, you'll hear Ifoso later on today. But this word disruption is really, really important because it's really, for me, it's about change. It's about how are we taking a system from its current state and transforming it into a new way, but also disrupting the mindset of how we think about a situation and how we think about solutions. And I think Africa is really ripe for disruption because of many different things. And I'm going to go over the course of the next 20 minutes, go through not only how we at the U.S. African Development Foundation, but how I also see Africa and the opportunities. And hopefully you'll learn something. Hopefully it'll be engaging, and I'll try to keep it a little bit informal. It's early in the morning. I know some of you had late nights, but no matter what, you're here. And since you're here, hopefully we'll learn some stuff together. So Africa as an opportunity, the opportunities in Africa. See this dollar sign? It really represents the growth and growing economies in Africa. 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world in Africa, globally. Leading the charge, Ethiopia and Ghana. Fastest growing economies in the African continent. 1.2 billion people. If you think about Africa as a market, there's a new Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. Some of you are familiar with. Africa is one market, 1.2 billion people. China as a market, 1.4. India as a market, 1.3. So the African continent is a game changer as it relates to potential opportunities for producers and consumers. These are all opportunities that can be seized. Natural resources, we can, I don't have to say that to anyone. You think about Africa, you're thinking about land, you're thinking about minerals, you're thinking about oil and gas, all of these things. These are opportunities, if you will. And then also young people. Anyone know the average age of an American? Guess. Average age of an American. 38. Wow, 38, spot on. 38. Average age of an African, 19. The youngest country in the world, 17, 19, there's some different stats, but you're right. Youngest country in the world, Niger. The average age of a Nigerian, 15 years old. They also have the highest birth rate in the world per family. So these young people are going to come in age and present opportunities for transformation in the continent in very, very, very numerous ways. And so if you have a young population, that's an opportunity. If you have growing economies, that's an opportunity. If you have producers and consumers and a rising middle class, that's an opportunity. If you have natural resources, that's an opportunity. So why don't we talk more about the opportunities of Africa? Well, because some of the challenges are also real. You think about food security and food insecurity. 1.2 billion people, 27% of the population of the continent, severe food insecure, severe malnourished. Wow. So this is the morning. Nutrition, okay? They don't have enough. You got me? Not enough nutrition, okay? Malnourished, I got it. Woo. Glad it's a welcoming crowd, Reed, you know, got a little worried there. But food insecurity, 27%, this is double the number for any other continent. Energy access, energy is everything. 1.2 billion people, 600 million people who live their lives not with lights coming on with a switch, but by candles, by batteries, by diesel, by kerosene. 600 million. This isn't as a result of a hurricane. This isn't because there was a problem with the power grid. There is no grid. 600 million people, no access or very limited, consistent access to energy. And then, as I said, these young people, it is an opportunity. But 12 million young people every year needing jobs, need to be employed. So these are real challenges. And these challenges, if you really look at them and you link them to the opportunities, it also creates an opportunity for real disruption. So when I think about the United States, yes, the land of the free, the home of the brave, and maybe when I was growing up, it was the land of opportunity. But now the land of opportunity really is the African continent. But it's going to take some new thinking. It's going to take some new energy. It's going to take smart people coming to Fuqua and really figuring out how to turn these challenges into opportunities that can be seized upon, and so more can be done to really grow the continent and provide the food security the continent needs, the energy access the continent needs, the employment that the continent needs. And there's issues that I won't really touch upon as they relate to health and education. There's some esteemed speakers who are going to come throughout the day to talk about some of those issues. So I feel like Africa's disruption ready. I think Africa is ready for disruption because those opportunities are there and those challenges are there. And when they meet, when you really link them, you're talking about transformational change, real disruption. So if Africa's disruption ready, where are we sort of in the trajectory of what's happening and able to happen in the continent? Because there's some positive things that are happening. But I would say, after having spent a lot of time on the continent, lived in Ghana, anybody from Ghana? Lived in Ghana, lived in Nigeria, Hayudeo, lived in Kenya, Habari Gani, Missouri Sana, lived in South Africa, Tobalong. So spent a lot of time, probably, the past 20 years, combined more than 15 years on the continent, living, working for a number of different organizations. And after all that time, what I can say is that I really see the continent's disruption ready, but the The real transformational change is very interesting because it's happening in one real sector, or one sector combined with another, and that's really in the tech sector. These are early disruptors. So most of the stories that you see today about Africa and the opportunities has a lot to do with people who are used to taking risk. You know, take risks, people in tech, they're innovators. They're looking for what's new, but they also need a huge amount of people. So 1.2 billion is an opportunity for them for disruption. So we all know M-Pesa, mobile money. I mean, my Kenyan sisters and brothers, I mean, spending from 2011 to 2016, living in Nairobi, covering the continent for the Rockefeller Foundation, I can just tell you how crazy it was to come back home to the US. Because in Nairobi, you're going to restaurants, almost 6 years in Nairobi, no cash. We didn't really use cash. It was all about M-Pesa. I mean, you use cash, I'm being a little bit, flippant, but literally, it's almost cashless. And even when we had to use our cards, you needed a card with a chip. Guess what? The banks 3 years ago, 4 years ago, our American credit cards from Bank of America, the land of Bank of America here in North Carolina, Wells Fargo, we didn't even have chips. So we were used to swiping. And in Nairobi and all over the place, they're like, okay, give me your M-Pesa number. We're gonna money transfer. So we know those stories. These are early financial systems, the tech companies, the tech communities. Microsoft, African office. IBM, African office. MasterCard, Google, Facebook, all of them, they are there. They are seeing Africa, the continent of Africa, as an opportunity for real disruption. They're early. They're not thinking, they're not on the sidelines, they're trying to figure it out. And they're putting money and people on the ground, and some of you may go and end up working with some of these companies, but they're early because they see it. So it tells you that it's viable, that it's possible. I work in the development space. I work in a space where we also look for early opportunities to bring about transformational change that are linking people's lives and their livelihoods. And so at the U.S. African Development Foundation, ADF, the foundation, whatever you want to call us, we're disruptors, but we're disruptors in development. So we're really transforming the way that you think about international development, global development. Think about this space. This is not donor-driven. It's not your grandfather's development agency, if you will. The key word that I'll use throughout, and Sherry and I will talk about it, sort of is we think about it from a venture philanthropy standpoint. Because we're the U.S. government, we have money, we have foundation in our name, we make grants, but we're doing it in a way where we're really trying to be results-based. So who are we? Independent agency established in the 80s as a complement to the traditional model of development, which was USAID, which is contract-driven, which a lot of you will be familiar with, the donors giving, offering support, aid, assistance to others based upon our terms and our interests and our areas of intervention. So we're almost the exact opposite and complementing that. Where do we work? We think about the places where there's underserved populations. Africa's growth story is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal growth story, but there are many people and places that are being left behind. That's a fact. And so we try to go to those places and those populations where how can we help more people become part of Africa's growth story? And that's in the Sahel. That's in the Horn of Africa. That's in the Great Lakes regions. That doesn't mean we're not in Kenya, we're not in Nigeria, or doing work in South Africa, but a lot of these places and populations, they will be left behind in Africa's growth story. We all know inequality in this own country and what we're hearing in the conversations. So a lot of Africans are getting richer, and also a lot of Africans are getting poorer. And so we try to bridge a gap and try to provide early stage seed capital, local technical assistance to make sure those poor and vulnerable populations are not left behind as Africa does rise, if you will. What do we really do? We're a grant maker, but more importantly, we use grants to make change. So we're a change maker. We're really trying to transform local economies at the grassroots level, at the social enterprise level, to really bring about transformational change using seed capital, some early stage, I can use business language here, right? Early stage, seed capital, de-risking capital, linked with project management, local technical assistance, Africans helping Africans. We're funding an African organization and linking them to African technical assistance. You'd be shocked, those of you who know a little bit about the international development space, at how little the amount of money that African organizations get directly. I'm saying not going through any US-based nonprofit or organization that we trust them, so we'll give them the money, and then they'll go to an African community, and they'll help those local communities know how and learn how to manage the money. But those African communities and organizations don't touch the money. It's almost always sort of a pass-through, if you will. So we want to build African institutions that can attract capital, that can grow capital, but also African technical assistance providers that can really transform local communities and help out, and not from a standpoint of a handout, but from a real helping hand to really look at situations and solutions to bring about transformational change at the community level. How do we do that? How is it disruptive? The approach is pretty disruptive because we start bottom up. We're in the communities. We're not top down with I don't sit in Washington, D.C., or my team or my colleagues sit in Washington, D.C. and find out what should be happening in Turkana or in Borno State, or what should be happening somewhere in the hinterlands of a country. We're literally in those communities having bottom-up driven solutions. That's how we operate. That's disruptive to development. Because the people who have the challenges are people who somewhat have some of the answers and the solutions. They just need somebody to listen to them. They need somebody to work with them. So this bottom up, we're going direct. So we're not going through a lot of intermediaries where, and you guys have all seen this, and there are organizations where you think about, give $1 for this cause, and how much really hits the community? 10 cents, 10%, 20%. We're going direct. So the funding that we provide, we want it to go directly to the communities, not through intermediaries. We're all about pulling solutions, investing in Africans and their ideas. So you're going to hear a lot about this later on today, around push-pull strategies. And we're all about pulling solutions out from the communities, not sort of sitting back and saying, this is what you should be doing, this is what we know, this is what should happen. Now, we're not pushing down anything. Participation and co-creation. We don't have the solutions. I may have awareness, we may have knowledge of what's happening in those communities, but it really is about co-creating and participating with those communities. This is disruptive. This is not how development is done, guys. It's not how people lend money. So this is really disruptive to a whole, we don't just go and implement what we think is best for that community. We're really trying to have them co-create the solution. So we've all heard last mile. People think about last mile. It's a very common sort of phrase in development. And what it essentially says is I start in Durham and I go to the farthest reaches of a community where the tar road ends and the dirt road begins, and that's the last mile. So I'm reaching the last mile. But that presupposes that I started here and I'm going there. We think about it from a first mile standpoint. What's the first phase? We're already there. We're in those communities. What's their first mile out from poverty to prosperity? So we're thinking about what's the first phase, early stage development. So this is language, but it really has real nuance because it says where you're coming from. That's the last, farthest reaching place. But if we're starting from there, if we're starting in those communities, it's the first phase of development. It's the first startup capital that they get. It's the first investment in helping them be part of the game, to get in the game. So we think about it in that way. We're ultra local. We all travel a lot, but the people who run our programs and projects and investments in 20 countries, 100% all African. We don't have any expats. We think Africans went to Fuqua and went back home and wanted to start an organization, and we're going to trust you to run our programs there. We don't need to send someone else who's not from the community, not from the country, not from the continent, that we just think has a better perspective. We're ultra local. So our management team, over 100 different people, 20 different countries, all African nationals. And then we are very much about blending capital and capacity building. Those of you who think about technical assistance or have a background in social impact or social enterprise, capacity building is the name of the game. Training and financial management, and let's teach them their books, but sometimes they need some money. So we also are about the capital, the cash, the investment, but we're linking it with the technical assistance, with the capacity building. So it's both and. Capital and the local technical assistance, the capacity building, the project management support. We're giving an investment. Who's going to do the monitoring? Who's going to help them manage? Where's the mentorship coming from businesses? We go to a local community, agricultural cooperative, they're saying they need, I don't know, something easy, a tractor. Well, if you've never bought a tractor, if you've never used a tractor, you know it can help you, but do you need a 25 horsepower or a 250 horsepower? How do you know that? So you really need someone to hold your hand in some of that development. So even when you have the agency and the money, you still need some support in terms of project management and mentorship. And we ensure that, because we're taking risks with people who haven't had this level of investment, but we're linking them with people to really hold their hand. But they have the agency, they have the ownership. It's Africans and it's their ideas. So that both and is really, really important in the early stage investment space. Why do we do all this? Our focus is very, very clear. African enterprises and African entrepreneurs. Our funding only goes to 100% African-owned, managed, designed, delivered entities. Because who else is out there really trying to build the capacity of Africans to take advantage of the opportunity that the continent is presenting to them? This is disruptive. This is disruptive in the space. And I can say it's controversial to some extent too, because a lot of people who are in Africa have really great ideas of what they could do in Africa, and they can go there and they can start a great business. And they're like, I'm not African. I believe it. It's important. There's probably money somewhere for that. And I know there is, because I've been in this space. How many people are taking advantage and opportunities and giving agency to Africans who come from these communities, who come up with their own solutions? Who's going to back them? They didn't go to Fuqua. They don't have the network and the connections. They're living in those local communities, but they have ideas. They have thoughts that can bring about transformation. Who's backing them? Who's betting on them? So we have a very unique role in the space. It means that we turn down a lot of deals. It means we don't support a lot of really fantastic entities, but we're in the space of taking underserved populations and putting them in the game, of really creating a pathway out. So what do? We find, we fund, and we support African enterprises, African entrepreneurs, grassroots, small and medium size. Ultimately, what do? Why do we do that? Because we want to develop African enterprises and African entrepreneurs. We want to grow them. We're talking about how do they grow? How do they scale? And then, this is really important. This is really important for people in universities and business school students. We link them. So every college or university, on some level, measures its success, somewhat on its enrollment, somewhat on its admissions, but real success is, where do you go after? They ask the question as alumni, what job did you get? How much did you get paid? Because it shows that they did something here at Fuqua that made you more marketable, that someone wanted to hire you, so you got a job, that opportunity cost of 2 years away out of the workforce paid off, and it's a high-paying job, and that's a market of success. In development, it's really interesting, because success is that you helped. Success is that you got into school. Success is that we spent money on this project, and for 2 years or 5 years, we did this project, and that's success. It's an output model of success. What's the ultimate outcome? I don't really know, because it happened after my investment, after my support. So we're changing the game in development by saying our true measure of success is where our enterprises, our entrepreneurs go after us. Did we have a handoff, a baton? These are pre-commercial investments, and we're talking about grant financing. So it's venture philanthropy in the sense that it's a grant, but we're looking for a return, a social impact return, an environmental impact return, an economic return. So we are looking at a return, but we ask ourselves, did we link them to some forms of follow-on funding, new markets or new money? So we really care about life after our funding, which is really hard to change the mindset of a board of directors that says to me, did you deploy capital? Are we doing really great work? Yes, but real success is 2 years later, 5 years later. That dollar that's framed on their wall, that was us. We really helped them. So we're disrupting development. And we're seeing opportunities, and we're seeing challenges and making them opportunities. And this is sort of our reason for being. We're having disruptive impact. So what are we really measuring in these African enterprise and entrepreneurs? Are they growing revenues? Are they increasing incomes? Are they multiplying our grant value? $1, $100,000 grant in, after 3 to 5 years, are they able to generate revenues of a 2x or a 3x return? We want to try to figure some of those things out. Are they creating jobs, social impact, economic impact? Is it a better run organization? Every mom and pop shop doesn't have to want to be Walmart, but are you a really good, profitable, local mom and pop shop? And then scale. Scale in the sense that, again, because we're coming at this from the standpoint of making an investment, it's free money, if you will. Are you going to reach more people? If we make a grant and it's $200,000 and, hey, these 10 people will grab it, will have a job, that may not be a good deal for us. Because we were saying, are you going to have an outsized impact in terms of what you're trying to do on some phase of the development continuum? So over the past years, we've seen disruptive results. These numbers are numbers that most organizations, philanthropic, government, impact investments would die for in some sense. Because we're really saying $112 million over the past 5 years, 1,000 enterprises catalyzed. And these are ones that have those metrics for success. They're growing jobs, they're increasing incomes, they're building their organizational capacity, they're potentially poised for scale. And we're impacting millions of people. That's a real factor of success, that millions of people are seeing their lives and hopefully put on what we call a pathway, a real pathway to prosperity. It's not an intellectualized pathway. We really want to see you growing. We want to find you where banks are saying no, where investors are saying no, where shops and supermarkets are saying no, they won't buy your goods, that after our support, our funding and technical assistance, that they're saying yes. You can supply into us. You have a real capacity. We'll buy your goods or your services. We'll do that. And so we've seen really disruptive results, transformational change results. Let me give you 3 quick examples of where we've seen this. And I love this picture because this woman is serious, right? She's like, fight the power. We do need to think about fighting the narrative for Africa, fighting for a more positive narrative, fighting to change the way people's mindsets happen around whether it's investing or doing work in Africa. Because we're changing it from a mindset that says that Africa is a problem to solve. The African continent is a problem to solve, opposed to the African continent is an opportunity to seize. People who are looking for opportunity, who are looking to do deals. That's why that first slide, early slide around tech is interesting, because they're used to taking risk. They're used to putting money out there. They know that if they get it right, it's going to be transformational. So they see it as an opportunity to seize, opposed to a challenge to solve or a problem to solve. So we see this really clearly in sort of the 3 verticals in which we do most of our work. And we didn't just decide, hey, we like agriculture, we like energy, we think unemployment is a big issue to solve. It's what the African countries, communities, continent is telling us. They're saying, let's figure out agriculture. 70% of Africans earn their livelihoods one way or another along the agricultural value chain. 70% of 1.2 billion people. And 70% of that 70% are women. So opportunities for women all along the agricultural value chain. So we've seen this in a country like Rwanda, which is basically a startup nation. Rwanda Inc. They really have an enterprise-driven model. And after literally atrocities in '94 and 30 days and 1 million people killed, having died, the country had to rebuild. And now one of the cooperatives, a $300,000 investment in seed capital from us. Now, this agricultural cooperative of coffee, $4 million. And they're selling they have their own brand. This is their brand, it's local, but they're selling into Starbucks, they're selling into plenty of different places, because 40% market share in Rwandan coffee is huge. But I also wanted to share that and these linkages are important. So why does it matter that cashews, Africa is the largest producer of cashews in the world? Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana. Why is it important that they're selling into Costco? Because these are market linkages that once those supply chain linkages are established, sustainability, because now you're growing for a market. You're linking into global supply chains. We also want them to link into local supply chains. The cashew example is from Benin. We want Beninois cashew farmers to sell into Nigeria and other places as well. But these international linkages are good for the US, they're good for Africa, they're good for trade and investment. Shea butter into Whole Foods. So these are companies that are thinking about their own future success with the African opportunity. So they're not doing this. This is not charity. Costco isn't just sort of saying, hey, this is a nice thing to do. They're servicing our needs. The same thing with Whole Foods and many other companies. So agricultural supply chains, linking small grassroots farmers, helping them grow, helping them link to follow-on funding for new markets and new money. That's the metric of success for us. This guy here, his name is Ifeanyi. Ifeanyi is Nigerian, a really great brother. He and his partner, they really were thinking about this. Obviously, if you're Nigerian and you spent time in Nigeria, the energy challenge is a real challenge. So they're thinking about solutions, and there are places and communities that are never going to get on the grid, not in my lifetime, not in my kid's lifetime. This is probably not going to happen. And so they're thinking about off-grid energy solutions. And what does Nigeria have? Nigeria has sun, Nigeria has wind, Nigeria has everything. It's Nigeria. But literally, they, from solar and wind and hydro and bio solutions, we at the U.S. African Development Foundation, in the past 10 years, we funded 100 Ifeanyis in GVE energy. So the story of Ifeanyi is that he got a $100,000 grant from us that allowed him to pilot and scale his proof of concept for a mini-grid project. That mini-grid project, I think he probably had about 1,000 community members in one particular state. 3 years later, he's now had investments of over $2 million, $100,000 grant to an African entrepreneur who didn't go to Duke, who didn't go to any U.S. school, who had no connections to international, donor or investment communities. $100,000 now, $2 million of investment, is in 6 states, a mini-grid solution, and is impacting something like 120,000 community members. We found him, we funded him, we supported him, and he's on his way. GVE now, those of you who know Nigeria, is getting investment from Allon. Allon is a Shell oil subsidiary. He has more investment than he knows what to do with, and now he's scaling, and now obviously people want equity, so it's a whole different story. But that's what you want. You want those kind of pain points if you're really starting up. That's problems that you really want to have. So you find there's a really great story. He's traveled, all over the world. He's spoken now, and there's a lot of other investors who are looking at his solution, but mini grids in general, our solution for off-grid energy. So we're thinking about the social impact, but also the economic impact and the environmental impact. And it's one entrepreneur at a time coming up with solutions. And that's why we're disrupting renewable energy with other partners and other players, but he's one example. And lastly, let me close with Brenda. So Brenda's really, really dynamic. Anybody from Uganda? Okay, Kampala in the house, or somewhere near Kampala. So Uganda is a really interesting story, and Brenda has a really interesting story. So Uganda has literally over 40 million people in the country, and they have 10 registered optometrists. Most of them, if not all of them, are in Kampala, the capital city. Kampala, I don't know how big is Kampala. I don't know, $1 million, $1.2 million, something. It's a big city, but it's not most of the people don't live in Kampala who live in Uganda. Fair? So those optometrists are servicing the needs of urban elite. Well, visual impairment and sight issues are not an urban elite problem alone. So Brenda, who was a Yali Fellow, Young African Leaders Initiative, had an idea. She was a consultant with, and I'll name the firm, she was a consultant with Deloitte in Kampala, and needed to buy some new glasses, and her sister also needed to buy glasses. The average price of glasses, the kind that she was looking for, was around $390 for her pair, and then she's gonna have to get her sister's pair, and she's like, this is crazy, this is outrageous. This is, stupid money, if you will, to pay for glasses. That's what we pay in the US. So she's put her mind and her intellect and her background and said, we can try to solve this problem. Can we find out how many more people need glasses? Because there aren't that many optometrists, so people are walking around in villages throughout Africa, throughout India, throughout Latin America, thinking that the world is blurry. It's funny, but not funny, right? Literally, the world is blurry to you. Some people don't know they're colorblind until somebody else tells them that they're colors. So they're walking around thinking that the world is blurry. And literally, so when I see this picture, When I see this picture, it's a really interesting picture because spending a lot of time in Africa, on the continent, you don't really see a lot of kids with glasses. Think about every picture you've seen of some poor, vulnerable kid with, yes, the ubiquitous fly on his nose or his lip or his eyelid. Have they ever been wearing glasses? But here you see young kids with glasses all the time because they get their eyes checked and they have opportunities to get their eyes checked. Now, I only get my eyes checked really once every 10 years to renew my driver's license. That's the only time I really know that whether I'm seeing the world blurry or not too. But in general, something small like this, of visual impairments in villages, again, Uganda's one example, 40 million people plus 10 optometrists. Brenda said, can we use virtual reality to do eye testing and eye screening with their cell phone? Eye testing and eye screening to find out with young kids if they actually have visual impairments. Then she said, I'm not gonna stop there. Now, I really want to produce a cheaper, more cost-effective eyeglass so more people have access to eye care. So she took recycled plastic and now has created these frames, eye frames. The average cost of the frames, not the entire glasses, the frames, $100+ about $120. Her frames now, stylish, cool, hip, $20, recycled plastic. She also has a motto where, remember this name, remember Wazi Vision. She's on her way, and her business model is very Warby Parker-ish. Everybody know Warby Parker? Anybody know those people who wear glasses? She literally does the testing. You come into the shop and has a 24-hour turnaround time. 24 hours, you come in, you've gotten tested, and can produce glasses in Kampala. I brought Brenda to Austin, Texas, to South by Southwest. Big conference there, and she presented on stage. She got off stage. Again, this is a young woman from Kampala with no connections, no, high net worth friends. She got off stage. She had 3 VCs talking to her within the first 2 minutes of walking off stage. Because if you get this right, if you can sell glasses to 1.2 rising consumers and producers, and by 2030, 2 billion people, you got a business model that's scalable and it's a real business, and it's not a challenge of visual impairment anymore. It's an opportunity to bring corrective vision to hundreds of millions of people. So these are the kind of things that not only keep me up at night, but wake me up in the morning. This opportunity to really support disruption in Africa by taking Africa's challenges, by taking the things that we say, woe is Africa, and turning them into real opportunities, that we're disrupting the way Africa is visualized, the way Africa is thought about, and the way Africans are able to sort of take empowerment and transform their own lives. And it is very much leading with Africans and their ideas, finding them along the way, supporting them, and then letting them go and grow way beyond us. So this is why I'm always excited to come and talk to young people, or talk to old people, or talk to anyone who's interested in Africa and changing the narrative and really looking at Africa, again, not from a standpoint of a problem to solve, but a real opportunity to seize. And this is why I want to encourage all of you to think about how you do think about challenges and being a disruptor, and what you can do in your own lives, in your own domains, to really think about this emerging market, because other people are. This is what I tell my team all the time. Africa's not waiting for us. The continent is not waiting, they're moving. Are we gonna be a part of that solution? Are we gonna jump on the train? That's the other thing about this, is that things are happening at a faster pace. I'm the guy who's trying to use a card with no chip in Nairobi, and then the cashier is like, we don't accept that. Your technology is too old. This is happening, it's moving fast. And so when I think about about what your opportunities are, when I think about how we can do more together, it really is about joining this disruption. It really is about turning Africa's challenges into economic opportunities. And it really is the continent that's calling people to come back or to come, because disruptors are wanted. There are people who are saying, I want to get in the game, I want to do more, I want to transform my own lives, help me disrupt this system. So let's all join the clarion call and become disruptors. Thank you.
So, you and I had a wonderful opportunity to get caught up in chat, and it was so wonderful to see and understand really the model of USADF. But I want to start at your first mile. Let's go back, right? Because I think part of this is really about...
I see what you did there. My first mile. I like that.
Yeah. I pick up nuggets. I pay attention. But, we're in an academic institution. These are a mix of young professionals as well as students and other professionals who are always looking for lessons learned and how people got to where they are now. And so I'm curious, maybe you could start with, what does CD mean? But then also in the context of the influence that your family has had, your upbringing, where you grew up, and your trajectory, and kind of where you are now, and why you're so passionate about this.
It's a big question. It's a really important question. And lunch will be served, dinner will be served, because we'll be here really, throughout, because I have a lot to say on those topics. But in the short version is, and I'm asked this question every single day, what does CD mean? And literally, CD is my real name. My full name is CD Glin Jr., just those initials, Glin Jr. So I guess, for me, it started really early in being successful, because I was the smartest kid in first grade. Once I learned the ABCs, A, B, C, D, I could write my name. I was done. The teacher said, what's going on here? I was done. CD, I'm good. They're like, all right, go to second grade. That's what you have to learn. So I was an early adopter. No, it started with sort of just in this sense of having, an interesting, strange name, if you will. So that questioning, or that sort of, who are you? What are you? You need to be unique. There's probably a story behind it. What's the story behind it? I think for me, that sort of set off this trajectory of really trying to be more and do more. I come from a family of 5 brothers and 1 sister. There were 6 of us. My dad was in the Air Force. I was born in Rome, but not the Rome you think. I was born in Rome, New York, but I tell people I was born international because it's Rome. I was born in Rome. Where were you in Rome? But it was Rome, New York. It's upstate New York, near Syracuse. My dad was stationed on an Air Force base up there, and I'm number 4 of 6 kids, and we were very much a lower middle class, African American Black family. And my dad got an assignment to go to Italy, and so I did get to Rome by the time I was 4. And that set off this global nomadic journey, if you will, of being able to be in a lot of different places and be 100% who I was and who I was to my family, who I was, those communities. I mean, you got to think about this in the 70s, late 70s, the 80s, where an African American family of 8. So Glin, party of 8, that's airplane seats, that's all of that. And we would go, and we'd be in Italy, and then we moved to England, and then later we moved to Portugal. But the interesting thing is that I grew up being African American outside of America, and so a lot of my interests and values I got to live vicariously through, whether it's media or other connections. But it also gave me a perspective to sort of really do a deeper dive on where the root causes of some of the things that were negative about African Americans, and that's why the perception of Africa sort of resonates so much with me, because I think that these negative notions of who people are really, really destructive. And so I would, outside of the US, see a lot of things in the 80s and early 90s and what was happening and the plight of African Americans, and sort of being of that culture but not in that culture gave me a really unique perspective to sort of see America differently, but also to see Black people differently. And to walk into a school in England or Italy or someplace and see that one African American student, and for him to feel, wow, there's another Black person who's here. It was a real thing. It was a real thing. And then when they would know, oh, he has 4 brothers and a sister. There's a lot of them. And then they would be really excited because there's a community and a connection that wouldn't have happened probably if I grew up in the US in a dominant culture or what have you. And so it was really interesting. And then I think just having some of the thought process of saying, being different things to different societies. What did Italians think about people and culture, and sort of having to be a translator? What's your name? I explain my name. What are you interested in? What do people think? How is it sort of being sort of this representative of a people and a culture in a time when the world wasn't as connected as it is now? I think that led me to sort of be someone who wanted to always be a representative and share the narrative and try to have people join the cause. And there's probably 3 things, Sherry, that have been really, really throughout my life and career journey and personal journey. And that's really owning the fact that you had to raise your hand and step up. So volunteering has always been, and I don't mean this in the Peace Corps sense, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer, but I mean just volunteering. I'll help out. I'll do this, giving of yourself. So that's been sort of something throughout, and it was in my family.
I was going to say, did you get it from your family?
Yeah, totally. My parents, as public servants in the military, for your country, but just these environments where we had to represent, we had to do more, and if we didn't, people didn't know the narrative or know who we were. So volunteering and giving of self has been really transformational for me. I think being visible. So not hiding. You can't be visible in some of these environments that we lived and worked in. It would be, hey, 8 new black people just walked into the school or the store or what have you. It was a very interesting. Maybe people in the U.S. and the Midwest sort of feel the same way, but we're in foreign countries. Are you African? You're not African. Are you American? But you're not the Americans that we know. And it was always having to do that. So being visible was a fact of life, but also being visible in this. And if I wanted to bring about change, if I wanted to do something sort of saying I can step up and see me for who I am, for who we are. And then I would just say, really on some levels, of having some level of a vision. I've always sort of thought about what's next and what's now, sort of trying to see around the corner, where are the trends, where are things going, enjoying the moment, but not living in the moment, really thinking through. And so having some level of vision of where I wanted to go personally or professionally, or my parents are thinking about what's our next assignment. So we're in a place and they know 3 years later we'll be in someplace else. And so having this forward thinking really, I think, shaped who I am. And so those 3 V's on some level of volunteering and being visible and sort of really having a vision for my life and my career, it comes from my family. My mother and my father, the Rocks, my sisters, my brothers, I'm kind of the weird one. We were talking, weird one in the sense that once they stopped all this traveling, my dad retired and we got back home, some of my sisters and brothers were like, look, we're setting down roots. We're not going anywhere. We're not moving every 3 years. And I was the one who's like, all right, what's the next adventure? Where are we going next? What am I going to do with my career? But I think that upbringing of just being exposed to different things shaped who I am.
So that's a great segue into, I'm wondering, so you grew up in this family that really traveled the world. So the question is, you come back for college, because you talked about the fact that you really spent most of your formative education outside of the U.S. Come back for college, you choose Howard, so that's interesting.
HU?
Yep, HU. So talk about that, and then talk about, one would think either what drew you to the Peace Corps, because you had all this experience outside, so either, and you come from a volunteer. So was it that really drew you into serving in the Peace Corps? You had already kind of experienced the world, so what did you feel like you would gain from that? And then where you were assigned, does that influence then your really focus on the continent from there on out?
Yeah, I think, it's really interesting. I've always had some kind of adoration and intellectual aspiration to learn more about Africa, even as a young person. When growing up and being in school in the late 80s and then early 90s in South Africa and Free South Africa movement, it was sort of the hotbed. It was the issue of the day. And I can tell you, I used to, in 11th grade and 12th grade, we were like Free Mandela and anti-apartheid rap songs and things of that nature. And I just sort of always sort of said, okay, again, what is this Black experience in the U.S., but what is it globally? And how am I really different? I just happen to have been born somewhere else, but am I really different than other Black people, and the vast majority of whom don't live in the U.S., who live in Africa? So there was that connection. And then there was this desire to sort of really get to the root cause of all the challenges that I saw and experienced in the US. And I went to Howard as a political science major. I chose an HBCU for a very specific reason, because I wanted to be in a familial environment in the US, as it was the first time from a holistic standpoint of going to school in the US. Even though we were overseas, we were in American schools, but we weren't obviously in America. But I think the Africa piece really was about, there has to be a longer tail to this narrative of why people are in the situation that they're in, and what's this root cause. And so the African-American experience that sort of says, your history began with slavery, it didn't resonate. It was like people came from somewhere. They were brought to this country, and they had different languages and different cultures, and all of that is gone. And I wonder what role that plays in how people, become who they are or how they're perceived. That, coupled with Howard and DC, which is a very international environment, sort of led me to get really involved in this sort of Free South Africa movement. And that, I think, coupled with the fact that I knew I wanted to have, I had been bitten by the bug. I wanted to travel. So it wasn't the Peace Corps for me first. It was like, what job can I have that's going to basically have me traveling? So I was literally going to the Air Force. When I got to college, my plan was I was going to go in the Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force. Then I learned in college, I was like, oh, diplomatic corps. So later on, I actually ended up being a Foreign Service intern and spending time at the State Department. But the Peace Corps piece really came from a point of real firsthand perspective and authenticity. Mm-hmm. I'd spent a lot of time in Western Europe. We'd traveled all over the US. But to be on the continent. So when I was in the Peace Corps, I was very much, I want to go to Africa because I want to have this authentic experience. I want to know what it's really like. And that is where having this firsthand perspective of of meeting people where they are, of not perceiving them as I see them, to really go and experience that life. It was very much a part of what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a part of that change. But the DC environment, Howard University, internships, all of this sort of kept me global. I was still very much, I thought about the world. I knew the US was important, and it is important, but I knew that there was a bigger world outside, and that we had to figure out as a people, as a nation, how to connect with that. And the Peace Corps gave me the opportunity to be on the ground, to live, work, eat with, experience, what it was like to quote unquote be African, but to be in Africa. And that is what led almost every decision from that point. Because South Africa also was transformation. It was a country that was renewed. I mean, right. Mandela was president. I'm old. Mandela was president. We got to see a new South Africa, a country being born. And that was really, really powerful for me, because I could see transformational change happening in a nation. All things aren't perfect, a lot of challenges. South Africa is a very complex place, but to see that transition happen in the way that it was, and to be a part of that, was really visceral for me. And that sort of is what launched my interest really in how am I going to make a contribution? Is it by working at the community level? Is it by economic development? Is it healthcare? Just knowing that there were all these opportunities that were challenges to be a part of something bigger, and that somehow, some way, this African continent is going to be a part of the future of our world. And this is in the 90s. And I just knew that there was so many things happening, and people who had been left out of the game, that I wanted to be a part of putting them in the game, but I knew that started with giving of myself. I knew I had to sort of be authentic and not just be someone who thinks about what we should do, but who had been a part of bringing about change on the ground.
Gotcha. Okay. So you fast forward, you served, and what you don't know, you haven't shared, is that you served in a very unique time where it was during the time of President Mandela, but you also had a country director who was African American, right? And you also had Foreign Service, Aaron Williams. So lots of role models and people and places that really, I think, also was just this unique. That's
everything.
Right?
That was everything. I mean, this hardly ever happens, and it was a unique moment in time. But the Peace Corps country director was African American, Earl Yates. The USAID mission director in charge of USAID. This is when the U.S. government, this is Mandela's president, Bill Clinton is president. We had sort of a White House send-off, and we were also showcasing, this is another key point about this group, we were showcasing diversity as a strength. South Africa had come from a history of apartheid, and when America was sending over Peace Corps volunteers, which we both know, part of your challenge as the director of recruitment when we were in the Obama administration, it has diversity challenges, the Peace Corps in and of itself. About 3% African American, 3% Asian American, or 4% Asian American, about 3% Latino. But out of 10,000 volunteers, if you use that round number, you have maybe less than 2,000 who are people of color, if you will. And these are the people who are going out as global ambassadors, citizen diplomats in these communities. Mandela and Bill Clinton literally had a conversation about when you send volunteers to South Africa, we want a diverse group. Mandela is saying to Bill Clinton, I want our nation to see diversity as a strength. I want them to see when they get off the plane that this is a mosaic of America that's coming to live and work with us to, quote unquote, will not teach us, show us how diversity can work and be a symbol of transformational change through diversity. And so our group was very unique, and the leadership of South Africa was very, the ambassador was an African American. The USAID mission director was an African American. The Peace Corps director was African American. This never happens. And it was really because of the importance of the country. And for me to see that, to be 23 years old and to see these people at the highest levels of US government and development assistance, and I could see myself in all of them. I was probably on my way from there, Sharon.
Right, right. That was it. So let's look at your career, right? So you are in the Peace Corps, you've been at Pixera Global, worked with USAID, World Bank, Rockefeller Foundation. Maybe talk about what have you learned, kind of briefly, what have you learned through each of these roles that have allowed you to transition from role to role, take something from it, but add to those new roles that you walk into to really make a difference and an impact, such that now you're able to take all of these skills and learnings and experiences and really kind of form a new type of model that we'll talk about a little bit later in this space.
In some levels, it's sort of my career journey and trajectory hasn't been like the cliche is do what you're passionate about. On some levels, I would say I took roles that allowed me to do what I'm good at.
Okay.
And then that led me to have the opportunity to do what I was passionate about, whether in that role or as a part of this role. And so playing to your strengths. So I kind of played to my strengths on most levels, and that led to the next thing. But I also took opportunities where I would be stretched, where I knew enough to be dangerous, but not to really do any damage. It was sort of, I really wanted to play to my strengths and learn something new, but I wasn't someone who's, I want to live and work in Africa, and that's what I'm going to go do. I needed to bring some skills. I needed to bring some capabilities. What is going to be my contribution? Mm-hmm. What am I going to really bring to the table? So I think I've always looked at opportunities where I knew I could contribute something, I could bring, I could tell the entity, the organization how my being there was going to help move the ball forward for them. And I also knew that my being there was going to basically give me maybe a new opportunity to exercise my passion, to do something new. And so whether it's having been a Peace Corps volunteer and then going to Pixera Global, which is one of the leading international business advisory sending programs. They take corporate volunteer programs, skill-based volunteer programs. I had been a Peace Corps volunteer. I knew about volunteer sending and support. So at Pixera Global, working with corporations and how do corporations use their time, their talent, and their treasure. Their real talent are their people. So Pixera Global wanted to put really impactful people on the ground to really work with local organizations. And I had something to offer because I had worked in a volunteer sending place, but I didn't know a lot about corporations and their strategies and what they were trying to do. So I had a lot to learn there. Transfer that, going back to the Peace Corps, serving in the Obama administration, obviously that's an honor that I would have dropped anything for. But then I think really, the move to the Rockefeller Foundation changed everything for me because it really had me ask questions about development and about business of what would you do if you could do anything? And those are questions that really get at the heart of like who you are. If you could do anything, what would you do? If you had this much money, we used to interview. In my interviews, they would say, okay, yes, you're great, you're passionate, you want to impact the world, here's $2 million. What are you going to do? And it was silence, like literally. So money's not the issue anymore. We have money. How are you going to problem solve? How are you going to make it sustainable? How are you going to, these were really hard questions. And then what are you not going to do? Where are the sort of barriers that you're putting on yourself so that you don't try to go too wide and too far. And so in the philanthropic space, in the grant-making space, but also in the venture philanthropy space, this is where you're trying to have a positive impact, but you're looking at results. You're really looking at, as a result of this investment, this work, what does it mean? And so when I had to ask those questions, because now, I think my dad told my mom when they first met, they were at, I don't know, some place, and he said, hey, how you doing? And they got to know each other, and he said, I'm not begging, I'm buying. So I'm not begging for help me out, this and that. I got money. We can do this. So when you are in a place where money isn't the issue, it's like, what impact are you going to try to make? Those equal very tough questions. And so that gave me new muscles. I had never experienced anything like that. NGOs, nonprofits, governments, we're tied to all these different strategies and funding cycles and all this. It was Rockefeller. We're deciding the strategy. We're deciding what to do. How are we going to have the most impact? So I literally started afresh in my thinking because I had experience. I had worked underground. I had worked at the IFC and the World Bank. I had done all this stuff, but I'd never been untethered.
Okay.
Literally, we could just decide to do stuff, and it's like, oh, wow, we need to take some time. We need to really think about that. And that's why in that space, people talk about it, and it's where you do spend a lot of time thinking, because you don't have to just react. You really can be a lot more thoughtful. And that Rockefeller experience led me to come back to the US. I was with Rockefellers in Nairobi, and really have this opportunity to take an organization, all the mission and the mandate, everything aligned with what I want to do.
So let's talk about here now, the funding. So you talked about this different measure of success, right? And ROI in this landscape around venture philanthropy. How is your funding model at the foundation different? Who are your partners? Who do you work with in order to allow you to have a different type of measure of success?
It's a great question. And that is the question. In terms of how U.S. government entities function, Congress appropriates funds, you get a budget, you spend down that budget over the course of the year, and then you show some results, and then you recapitalize the next year. And so for me, coming in, having been outside of government, having been in sort of a social impact venture philanthropy space, I said that's not really sustainable, because as soon as the winds change or politics change or anything, we're very susceptible because we're small in the big picture of U.S. foreign assistance. And at the end of the day, where's our money going? It's not going to U.S., it's taxpayer dollars that's going to Africans. So there's a woman who's a school teacher in Wyoming who pays her taxes, and some minuscule portion of that ends up to a women's cooperative in Burkina Faso. So I really need to show how this just makes America better and does what it needs to do to really show impact. And so early on, I just knew it was all about leverage. I said, I want to ensure that the $30 to $50 million we get, that's congressionally appropriated funds that we use to operate, how can I use that as almost in our own seed capital to then be able to draw in other partners? So it was really thinking about not our own delivery, what we were going to do to deploy capital. How could we use our capital to draw on others to really invest in our model? So if we focused on the model of having more impact, who else wanted to have impact? Impact investors, other government agencies, African governments themselves. They want to reach those populations. They don't know how, they don't have the tools, they don't have the skills, they have the will. And so we then started saying, let's partner. Let's really have a partnership strategy that really allows us to diversify our resources, but also to look at what do U.S. corporations want to do who are looking at Africa as an opportunity, and how can we be helpful? How can we leverage our presence in 20 countries, all of our staff, all the things that we're doing? How can we offer that up for partnership? How can we do that with countries? And that's why African governments somewhat co-fund some of our programs. And then how can we then look at communities themselves being showcased to be able to draw in more funding. So for us, it was really about not only a strategic approach, but resource diversification. And so now we can talk about countries matching and working with our funds. We can talk about companies. We can talk about foundations. And so for me, it was really looking at us not as just what money do we have and how are we going to use it. How are we a platform? A platform for transformational change, for disruption in Africa, and how can we do more with other partners?
Great. I'm getting the 1 minute mark. So does that mean 1 minute until we get questions, or I need to start wrapping things up? Questions. Okay, great. Because I have a ton of questions, but I think he wants to make sure you get questions from the audience as well. All righty. So I have one more question, then I'll open up to audience, and you can kind of just briefly talk about it. How do you identify your grantees? Like all these case studies, how did they find you? How did you find them?
So our model is very much being demand responsive, responding to local demand. And I would say in the past, you would find out about the U.S. African Development Foundation if you looked upon one of our grantees, if you sort of knew somebody who knew that there was this U.S. government agency that invested in African entrepreneurs. It was very much hit or miss. We talked about being inclusive, but you had to know somebody who knew somebody. What we've done now, like every university is now we've sort of said, you know what, I don't want to suppress admissions. I know Duke doesn't want to, or Harvard doesn't want to, but in development, I don't want to suppress submissions. I want to find a way to have a solicitation process, a screening process, a scoring process that allows us to sift through opportunities. So geography matters, and so there are countries in where what we do, the results matter. We look at what we talk about, the probability of success for growing incomes, for looking at revenue, for job creation, really using some due diligence to really screen. And are they also solving a problem that's aligned with some of the broader issues that align with our national interests, but also the government's national interests? And that's where the big buckets of funding go into sort of the agriculture, agribusiness landscape. The funding goes into the energy, the off-grid energy landscape. But also the place where we're almost sector agnostic is sort of young people and social entrepreneurs who are really trying to bring about transformational change. But we are looking at something around income generation. It's an enterprise development model. We do feel like enterprise creation and income generation and revenue generation and market making is a solution to poverty alleviation and to moving communities and people out of poverty. So that's sort of some of the things that we look at. And we also think about triple bottom line: social impact, economic impact, environmental impact.
That's the venture philanthropy model, right? So what questions do we have for CD from the audience? Okay, go ahead. And I have a little rule, so I like for people to say who they are before they ask their questions, just so we can all get to know each other.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. My name is Elizabeth. I'm not a Duke student. I'm about to enroll in UNC as a PhD student in public health. And my question is, how does USAID's investment decisions work in concert with, or perhaps even against, similar funding bodies at nations that aren't necessarily US's geopolitical allies or partners?
So that's a great, we'll take one at a time?
Oh, yeah. Mofe, we have, yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's a great question. At the end of the day, we're in countries that may not be 100% governed in a way in which our nation would like to see government govern. But because of our investment model is really community driven, it allows us, we're not funding the government, we're not even working as a bilateral partner with a lot of nations. Our relationships are typically with community members and African entrepreneurs and African enterprises. So it allows us as a US government agency to sort of be in those countries. And so there has to be at least some kind of understanding that we are going to look at entrepreneurs in your country and support them and work with them. But the relationship isn't necessarily we're deciding with that nation to go in and fund things. So I always talk about it that we have understanding at the country level, but our relationships, our investments are literally at the community level. And most governments and countries, that resonates with them. At the end of the day, they want their people to be on some level more prosperous and to advance. But it is something that is a delicate dance in a number of countries, and we have to have some different authorizations in different countries to actually fund there. And so there's some I mean, it gets really wonky, but congressional notifications. We're gonna fund this group in Somalia that really is trying to bring about transformational change. Let me tell a quick story about like hard places where our governments may not be 100% aligned. You know, youth employment and youth entrepreneurship, it's all great, and we think that we want to do more of that, but some places it's a necessity. So when we think about our funding, we're thinking about peace and security. Are we playing a role in that? Our values as a nation in terms of development, but also trade and investment. So there could be a trade and investment opportunity for the US, but peace and security is really real. So in a country like Somalia, and I lived in Kenya, and so it's next door, and there's a lot of things that happen in that country that impact things in Kenya, as Kenyans will know. The reality is a young person in Somalia has, in some instances, two options. Kind of do nothing and try to figure it out, or in some instances, join Al-Shabaab. So Al-Shabaab is a terrorist group that you may or may not have heard of. Al-Shabaab has a value proposition very simple. They tell a young person, there's no jobs, there's no opportunities here. For $50 a month and a cell phone, these 15, 17, 20-year-olds will literally put on a suicide vest, take up an M16 and kill themselves or kill others for $50 a month in a cell phone. We have a job training entrepreneurship program in Somalia. Over the past 4 years, we've trained over 5,000 young people, creating entrepreneurs and placing them in jobs. These young people, the average income they earn is $300 a month. So now, as the US, or as people who love Africa, we're at least giving young people the opportunity to choose. $50 a month and a cell phone, and you basically are gonna commit suicide or have to kill somebody, or create a business, get placed in a business, look at taking your future in your own hands, giving them opportunity, and maybe $300 a month. It becomes a real choice for them at that point in time. So when our government or other governments look at what we're trying to do, it takes the politics away a little bit, because now we're talking about things that really are impacting people's lives. And at the end of the day, that's where we try to have the most connective tissue, is how are we going to transform lives in those environments? And some of those environments are not necessarily environments that the US government holistically is supportive of. Way long-winded answer, but I just think it's really important that you guys get the nuance of what we do.
Yeah, and the flexibility that you have, independence to a certain extent that you have.
That's key. Agility and flexibility is key to our model.
I saw your hand with the blue shirt.
There's a young lady who was right behind her.
I thought I saw that. Okay. Whoever has a question.
Hi, my name's Miranda Wolford. I'm an undergraduate sophomore here at Duke, taking advantage of the free conference admission for us students. My question has to do with monitoring and evaluation. For monitoring and evaluating the efficacy of your investments, what markers do you look for, or rather, how do you quantify the benefits and such long-term returns?
That's a great question. M&E is central to all of our project monitoring, project management, and support. So we look at, on one level, we're looking at what's actually happening with the funding, because we're dispersing funding. We have local partners. So our local partners take a lot of the oversight responsibility of making sure that there is some efficacy and lack of corruption. At the end of the day, this is US taxpayer dollars. So fraud, waste, and abuse is very central. So if we're putting $10,000 down on the ground, or in aggregate 10 million, there are serious metrics for oversight that we have, and that includes site visits, that includes bank accounts. People have to establish separate bank accounts for our funding, who the signature holders. There's a lot of things related to the financial controls, and then we also are looking at monitoring, learning, and evaluation as it relates to the impact of the work. And so there are a number of indicators that we look at. There's things like what's called OCAC, the Organizational Capacity Assessment tool. Are we really building the capacity of an organization to have proper procedures and books and controls to be able to survive and thrive without us? There are things that sort of what's called PPI, sort of this progress out of poverty indicators. There's a food security index. So there are a lot of metrics and tools in the M&E landscape that we align with our investments. So this is not your typical due diligence as a venture capitalist. It really is a matter of really giving these organizations the ability to have world-class tools so that they can not only do really efficient and effective work today, but they have the tools and the skills to do it tomorrow. But because it is US taxpayer dollars, leverage or direct, the controls are world class. I mean, we literally, I've been in this space for a while and worked for a lot of organizations. I came here and I couldn't believe, I said, so we have like 5 touch points on $100,000, you know, 5 different people having oversight. It feels like overkill, but it's also because we're stewards of taxpayer dollars. And so we ensure that the work that comes out is transformational, but the funding that goes in is also managed well.
Well, CD, this time goes by way too quickly. I am so excited to see you. Thank you so much for being a part of our conference and for sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, and your insights, and your lessons learned and pearls of wisdom. And I look forward to us hopefully inviting you back here soon. I wish you all the luck, best of luck with the organization and the work that you're doing.
I thank you. I thank Fuqua. I think the Business in Africa Club. I mean, it's really an honor and a privilege for us to be able to, for the U.S. African Development Foundation, to share more about what we're doing. We're sort of the government's best kept secret. That shouldn't be a secret. So this is just an opportunity to let people know that there are models of development that are trying to bring about transformational change on the continent. I do want to close with sort of giving credit and a shout out to 2 of my colleagues who came down. Jarvis Holliday, who's one of the leaders in our communications, external affairs, and government team. Jarvis, just raise your hand. A South Carolinian who lived a lot in North Carolina and found out I was coming to Duke and was like, I'll volunteer, I'm there, I'm going. And then Elizabeth DeFries, who makes everything happen in the Office of the President at the foundation. So thank you, Elizabeth and Jarvis, for helping me get here and give me this opportunity.
Thank you.